the New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and great to have Bill Bennett with me again. How are you today, Bill?
I'm good, thanks.
Excellent. Maybe just to fill listeners in who might be new to the show, maybe you can remind everyone where you fit into this big wide world of tech and journalism in New Zealand.
Well, I'm a journalist. I write about technology and business. And just recently, it's been a bit more about business and a bit less about tech, but that's just how things are rolling at the moment. It comes around. Tend to specialize a bit more in what's going on in telecommunications, and I now produce a weekly newsletter on what's going on in New Zealand telecommunications, which is out every Friday.
Excellent. Oh, that's good. Well, folks should definitely make a point of heading across to billbennett.co.nz and signing up for that if they're not already on the list, right?
Yeah. You're welcome.
Good. And look, thank you to our show partners, 2 Degrees, Vodafone, Spark, HP, Gorilla Technology, Cyclone, and Aruba for their support. Now let's jump in. A fair bit going on, as always. Some on the local front, some more global, but relevant to us here in New Zealand. First up, Invisible Urban Charging have been in the media. Auckland-based firm who have some pretty innovative electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and they've been working really on the global stage, and they've announced plans to install 6,000 electric vehicle chargers in sunny Florida in the coming months. So going into sort of commercial parking locations and other parking lots. Always encouraging to see New Zealand firms taking New Zealand innovations out globally. Bill, that's quite a sale. 6,000 EV chargers. I mean, that's sort of well into the millions of dollars. That's for sure.
It is, and Invisible. They're a bit invisible here as well. I mean, we don't hear much of that particular company in New Zealand. But I was actually looking at that story, thinking, I wonder what 6,000 EV chargers would do for this country if we had 6,000 new chargers put in around New Zealand. It would certainly stop that worry that you have about getting from, say, Auckland to Wellington in a Tesla, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Auckland to Wellington is not really an issue from in a Tesla or probably most electric vehicles. And interestingly, we've got the situation where the range of our electric vehicles is growing, and there's more and more chargers to fill in the gaps. But yeah, certainly if Nigel Broomhall, who's the founder and CEO at Invisible Urban Charging, finds himself in a position where he wants to test a bit more of this infrastructure locally, I don't think there'd be too many complaints, right? So there's always gaps, and the more the merrier. In fact, I stopped in Turangi recently when we went up. We were going up Ruapehu, and I thought it'd be good to get a little bit of extra juice on the way from Taupo. And we stopped there. Somebody else was charging at the kind of the one fast charger that was there from ChargeNet, and we only probably had to wait a couple of minutes or so. It wasn't very long anyway. We did a few minutes, and we're away. But while we were charging, somebody else turned up and they wanted to charge. So there are times we could do with more infrastructure. But those with a Tesla are certainly in a much nicer position than those with any other electric vehicle at this point because of the number of Tesla stalls in addition to the general ones that of course are available to everyone.
Yeah, and
Um,
there are still areas where there's not much coverage, aren't there?
Yeah, look, I was looking at a trip around the South Island over the winter, and
Yeah,
getting from Wanaka up through Haast and up to Fox Glacier and that area. At this time of year, your vehicle's going to have a reduced range because it's colder, and if you're traveling 100 k's an hour or so, which maybe you're not on a chunk of those roads, but some of them you would be. You add all these different bits and pieces together, and it gives you, or adds up to a sort of negative range compared to the
yeah,
advertised range. Put it that way. And an older vehicle that's, well, older, 3 years old in my case, you end up getting this, and of course this varies from technology to technology, manufacturer to manufacturer. But with Teslas, they probably tend to drop off that 8 to 10% of range
yeah,
in their first sort of 3 to 5 years, and then it tends to level out. But of course, the newer ones have got a 20% more range to start with. So looking at that, thinking, oh, it could be a little bit tight at this time of year. So yeah,
yeah. And
as you say,
I
more
think this,
charges, bring them on.
yeah, exactly.
Now, also on the local front, I saw that Nano Girl Labs have launched a little creator project on Kickstarter, which looks like a really good initiative for getting young people involved with technology from a hands-on perspective, actually learning how these things are built. I'm sure, Bill, when you were growing up, there was a level of technology that youngsters could
Oh
um,
yes.
could learn. Certainly, when I was a crystal set to build your own
Oh
little radio,
yes.
uh, and so on. Right, so
Yeah,
there are these things. So, well, they've taken of that. That what was common going back to my childhood, and their project that they're looking to get funded through this Kickstarter, is build your own Bluetooth speaker. And yeah, it looks like a fun sort of project, and it's good to see them putting something out also onto the international stage by going on Kickstarter. I think they've done absolutely with one of their cookbook projects. So yeah, it's kind of fun.
yeah. It's exactly what got me started and interested in technology in the first place. When I was about 12, it would be 50 years ago now, or almost 50 years ago, my parents bought me a Philips electronic kit, which was like you could build circuits and so on. You didn't need a soldering iron. You could just string things together. And there were projects in there, like you say, a crystal radio and things like an automatic light switch where you'd wave your hand, and this was before there were LEDs. You couldn't, LEDs didn't exist at that time.
Right.
But I got started on that. But within a few years, I was building circuits with LEDs and breadboards and so on. And by the time I was in the getting towards the end of high school, I started building my own synthesizer. So, that's how I got started in this game. And I got pretty damn good with a soldering iron at that stage, I can tell you. Um, but it's exactly what kicked me off on that whole thinking about these things. And of course, at that stage, there wasn't much in the way of digital stuff, so it was all analog circuitry and so on. But by the time I got to university, it meant that I just completely aced first year stuff to do with computer science and so on because I'd done it all when I was a teenager. So it was brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I think have so much that's available to us cheap and instantly these days, that these desires and in some ways have to learn, they can easily fall by the wayside without a
Yeah,
little bit of effort to think about, well, how can a learning opportunity be created. So yeah, I think it's pretty good. To back them on Kickstarter, get one of these Bluetooth speakers is $100, and you can do them as a gift as well. And I think that includes an option to just put in $100, and then that they will distribute that to somebody that would benefit. So yeah, really cool project. They're looking to raise 150,000 US. So yeah, all the best to Michelle Dickinson and the team on that. They look like they're around 10% of the way. So get in there and give them some support. There's still well over a week to go there. So yeah, jump in if you want to be a part of that. I think it's great. Now let's talk about Vodafone, Bill. Vodafone and My Republic, and the return of the MVNO, Mobile Virtual Network Operator. You've written about this on your website at billbennett.co.nz, and no doubt in your newsletter. So maybe you can fill us in a little bit on what's going on here, and whether you think this is something that's going to be successful for Vodafone and for My Republic, who really extending their brand now to a mobile offering, which is somewhat different to any of the other offerings in the market. So it looks like a smart approach.
Well, the thing about the virtual networks, mobile virtual networks, is they're huge just in most other countries around the world, and they're not big in New Zealand. I saw somewhere the other day something saying I think it was actually Vodafone said that they at one point they were 1.8% of the New Zealand market. I don't think they were ever at that high. Actually, I think the number's actually smaller than that. The biggest virtual network before now has been the companies that were in the Vocus group, so the Call Pluses and Orcons and so on. But of course, they're now wrapped into 2 degrees, and they have their own networks. They don't need to be virtual anymore. I mean, I think they still are for the moment, but pretty soon they won't be. So, so whatever market there was for the smaller operators would pretty much have dried up with that merger going through. I mean, there's still Warehouse. Warehouse has an offering, and I think Kogan, I think, offers something in New Zealand too. But they're really. Yeah, but they're really tiny. They're very small indeed, and they're not hugely successful. I mean, if you go to, say, Australia, there's Virgin Mobile, which is quite big, and that's the key to it, is to have a brand which is instantly recognisable with consumers. Which is why, say, the Warehouse, you'd expect the Warehouse to perhaps do better than it has done, but the Warehouse has never put a huge amount of effort into it, and that's partly because the financial arrangements of the virtual networks in New Zealand is not as good as you'll find in overseas countries. And that's partly to do with the shape of the market, it's partly to do with the size of the market and so on. But it's also to do with the fact that the big carriers, particularly Vodafone and Spark, because recently 2 degrees probably wasn't as big an organisation, were reluctant to get into this game. Now, overseas, one of the reasons why telcos are very keen to offer virtual networks to companies like Virgin and so on is because you reach this point in the market where consumers they're a bit fed up with Spark, they're a bit fed up with Vodafone. They've tried 2 degrees and maybe they don't have the coverage, and there's nowhere for them to go. But if there was a Virgin or a Warehouse or whatever, and it offered an interesting deal, they could switch. And here's the rub, right? If say, for example, they were on Vodafone and they switched to My Republic under the new arrangement, Vodafone still gets 3/4 of the value of that account. They get the bulk of the revenue, so they don't lose a customer. They lose 0.75 of a customer. And what it does is it actually helps. It helps the big telcos keep their competitive positioning in a market when you when you look at it like that. So it's worked really well for some of the overseas telcos. And like I say, they've never really pushed it here in New Zealand. And they haven't pushed it because they haven't really needed to. But with Vodafone coming out of the traps and saying they're going to reboot that sector and making a real effort to push it, that means that Spark and 2 Degrees are going to have to follow suit reasonably soon, or they're going to start losing overall market share to all these mini Vodafone brands that that are traveling around under other labels. So it's actually significant for competition in the market. And we don't. I mean, I think it's a long time since we've mentioned Simon Bridges on the podcast. But when he was the communications minister, this was the one really significant thing he did during his. I think he was communications minister for about 9 months, but he got the Commerce Commission to go and look at the virtual market, and.
Yes.
It's something that has been looked at, and there's a lot of encouragement to make this work because it does has a huge effect on the competitiveness of the market. Not that our mobile phone market isn't highly competitive already; it is, but it just makes things better again for consumers, I think.
I think it's an interesting one because we are quite a small market in terms of the total number of people. There is something of a challenge, particularly if launching a mobile virtual network operator isn't going to move the needle. But what we've got at the moment is Spark and Vodafone being pretty close in their market share, and then 2 Degrees. You'd know the numbers actually probably better than I would, but certainly 2 Degrees have been sitting a fair way, a fair way back. Although continuing to grow that market share. So
In
it
round
seems
numbers,
like
it
a
would
smart
be
approach from
yeah. I was
Vodafone
going to say
to
in round numbers, it's very roughly 40-40-20. So 40 Vodafone, 40 Spark, 22 Degrees. And there's a little bit of complication in there because Skinny is completely Spark. I mean, there is brand differentiation, but there's not much differentiation. And some people like to count Skinny as a separate case, but it's not really. It's just a an offshoot of Spark. So I mean, it does change. It changes the competitive dynamic of the market. Who would be most threatened by Vodafone pushing this? I think initially it will be Spark who would probably be the most threatened. But Spark can roll out its own virtual network tomorrow. And I would imagine that somewhere deep in the bowels of the Spark building, there's a team working on it right now.
Yeah. Oh well, it's. I guess it's yet to be seen whether this round of mobile virtual network operators is going to, actually work very well because, as you say, they've never picked up that much market share, other than Skinny, which, as you say, is really just it's part of Spark, but it does.
Yeah.
I think from a consumer perspective, it looks like a traditional mobile virtual network operator type play, except that it's actually directly part of Spark. So it's it's a somewhat different approach there.
There's something else I should mention
Yeah.
before we stop talking about that, and that is that in the last year there's been a huge shift of people away from prepay to postpay mobile, and that's changing the market too. And the reason that's happened is because those unlimited plans are really, really good value. So there's been a huge shift away from prepay, and that will have some impact on what happens with the virtual operators too.
Yeah, now we'd be remiss not to actually go into what this arrangement sees My Republic take into the market. and they've shared with us their new plans. So they're what I've seen is three plans: Rocket Light, Rocket, and Rocket Max. So they certainly sound fast, and it aligns with the My Republic branding that we've seen over the years. And what they're talking about is rather than sort of what we're used to with unlimited data plans on our networks here in New Zealand, where you get, for instance, 40 gigs and then it slows down. What they're offering is from what I've read so far anyway, is that these are much more like a true unlimited offering, but the way that they control it is by putting a cap on the speed from the
Yeah.
start.
Yeah.
So Rocket Light is an offering that gives you 5 megabits per second. Rocket gives you 10 megabits per second, and Rocket Max gives you 20 megabits per second, uh, which for actually just individual mobile use might well suit some people pretty well. So that Rocket Light, the 5 megabits, uncapped $60 a month, Rocket 75, and then for their top the 20 megabits per second offering $100 per month. So I guess part of it's going to come down to also what they're able to offer in terms of handsets, if they delve much down that track, because it tends to be folks that are on those higher end plans who are often buying a reasonably sort of top end smartphone,
Yeah.
tied in to their offering. And of course, as is quite common, there's a bit of a sweetener for being a My Republic customer and having your ultra fast broadband with them. Can't quite see that with the notes I'm looking at here, but off the top of my head, it was $20 a month, and they've got a $8 a day roaming option there as well.
One of the things about that is it's going to be really interesting how that pans out, because I put it to you that unless you're tethering or you have some specialist application, you're really not going to notice the difference between 5, 10, and 20 megabits per second on a mobile phone. I mean, 5 is good enough to stream high definition video on your phone. So, what are you doing with 20 megabits per second that you can't do with 5? You know, if you're, like I say, if you're tethering, yes. If you've got a high data, if you've got an application which uses a large amount of data, you'll need it. But otherwise, I think it's going to actually show up some interesting things about some interesting ideas about how we use mobile phones and how we judge what we're getting from them. I mean, if you think back to all the fuss about the introduction of 5G, when it comes to, I mean, 5G has massive implications for fixed wireless and for other applications. But on your handset, you don't notice anything different if you go from 3G to 4G to 5G, almost. I was earlier today, I was stuffing around with the router and it wasn't working. So I had to do all my work on a mobile connection. And for some reason, today I could only connect it on a 3G. I don't know why, but it was only 3G today. And the performance wasn't really any different from connecting on 5G. So, it's actually going to show some interesting insights into how that works for consumers.
Yeah, I think obviously it depends what your usage is. In certain cases, you're going to see a big difference between 3G and
Yeah.
and 5G, but at times you won't. And they've certainly covered off some recommendations of in terms of their streaming. Now, I did just want to add a little bit more information. I made that comment about $20 off the monthly plan, which actually seemed pretty impressive. That's just for the first 3 months. After that, if you've got a fixed connection, broadband connection with My Republic, that discount drops down to $5 a month ongoing, because that was making their base $60 a month plan look pretty enticing, actually,
Yeah.
if that was going to be 40 ongoing. But even so, I think there will be a segment of the market that would find this quite a nice sweet spot. So I'm curious to see how it goes. I don't think they necessarily pick up a lot of customers, but it is at the higher end, which is of course these are the most valuable customers to be picking up. And mostly what we've seen in the past with mobile virtual network operators is it's kind of a discount, low cost play, whereas
Yeah.
this is actually quite different to that. So yeah, let's see how it plays out. Now, lots of other things going on in the big wide world of tech. Intel seem to be going through a bit of a meltdown of sorts, and really they're struggling at a level maybe we weren't expecting. Bill, they've
Yeah.
had their revenue. Really drop. And, looking back a year ago, they were celebrating a $5 billion dollar profit. And here they've just in the last quarter recorded 454 million. This is US dollars loss for the quarter.
Well, there's
So yeah, it's not really where they should be in terms of getting their business back on track, which it sounded like they were they were going to do. In fact, their revenue much lower than expectations. About 2.5 billion lower in terms of what analysts were expecting them to announce.
we've actually talked a little about Intel before in a previous podcast when I was in the studio. I remember there's two huge forces that have having an impact on Intel at the bottom end, or not necessarily the bottom end as such, but lower down the market. The Intel processors are being killed by Apple in the laptop market. The performance of the Apple laptops is so far out in front of the Windows Intel machines that it's not real. And it's pretty interesting if you follow the reviews in the international technology press, the reviews of laptops and so on. I've noticed in the last few months that all the reviewers have stopped comparing Windows machines with Apple machines. That if there's a new Dell or a new Lenovo or a new HP laptop, there's no longer a comparison made with Apple, and that's because if you do benchmarks, the graphs just make the Windows machines look a bit silly. I mean, the Apple machines are in cases twice the speed of even relatively high end Windows laptops, and that's dramatic. And the thing is that Apple have been out in front now for about 18 months on performance, and I was expecting that about now Intel would be catching up on speed, but it's not happening. If anything, with the M2 chip, the gap's even wider than it was. So at that end of the market, they're being creamed by Apple, and they're also being within the Wintel part of the market. They're being hurt an awful lot by oh God, it escapes me now. The name, the other
AMD.
the other
AMD.
AMD, being creamed by AMD. Then you go up the market into the server end of the market, and what's happening there, of course, is all the cloud companies are rolling their own processors. They're not buying kit from Intel. So, and the server market is, because of cloud, the server market is depressed as a. I mean, it may be still making money, but it's not using up huge volumes of Intel chips. So they're being attacked on all fronts suddenly. And they don't seem to have answers. They seem to be behind the play when it comes to building their factories as well. There's a lot wrong, and I think the days. I mean, I wouldn't say it's game over for Intel because 25 years ago, people were saying it was game over for IBM, and they're still around. But Intel are never going to be a dominant company ever again. That's just not going to happen. They will remain important for a long time, but they will not dominate the market again. And the future just does not look good for them. I don't think they've got any answers. I've seen this CEO came in with some big promises a year ago, and it's not happening.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I don't know how you pronounce his name correctly, but Pat
No,
Gelsinger
I wasn't going there.
is his name. And you're right. I mean, he came in with fair bit of bluster, and so I'm very curious to see where it goes from here. But you're correct in that the world has changed massively. I'm not sure that we're reading quite the same things on the performance differences. I mean, certainly the performance is very strong with the M1 and the M2 and the M1 Pro, etc. Chips, but it probably stands out the most from a power consumption perspective, and that what we're seeing is the Apple MacBook products have got a lot better in terms of battery life compared to what we're seeing on the Windows side in a lot of cases, and it's that sort of power consumption metric which is down a lot more, and that's without
Gotcha.
poo the performance, because the performance is very good, and ultimately it does come down to the actual laptops in the market, and those some of the newer chips from Intel coming through have some nice performance, and they might be able to beat the Apple chips, but that's not relevant if you can't actually buy those devices today. So it's all very well having a benchmark that says it does better, but if the battery life is too low, or you can't buy it, then you kind of have to take that off the table, don't you?
Oh, it does depend a bit on what you're doing as well. I think if you're using a lot of spreadsheet work or a lot of database work, then probably Intel's still the way to go. But for a casual user who just picks up a laptop and wants to work, I've got sitting on my desk here my M1 MacBook Air, which I've had now for some time, and I recently tested a quite high-end Windows machine, which cost, I think the list price was almost twice the price of the MacBook Air, and the MacBook Air is actually faster. So, and the MacBook Air is Apple's entry-level computer, so the performance difference is profound for most people. But there are applications where you would certainly want to go the Windows route for sure.
Now, looking at the US, and I guess sort of looking globally at some of the supply chain issues, geopolitical issues, we've seen that the US wants to change the picture as far as chip manufacturing is concerned, and that is part of the picture as far as Intel is concerned as well, because the Chips Act, which has now been coming into force, will allocate $52 billion of public money to subsidize the building of chip fabrication plants, which of course that creates a bit of an opportunity for Intel, Micron, who of course make a lot of memory. They're in there as well, but these extra funds will help, but it's going to take a long time to build these new chip fabrication plants. And we might be looking at the benefits or the shift in terms of manufacturing, taking up to a decade before that maybe gets a little bit more balance to it, shall we say, where some of the risks that we have today are are addressed. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the next few years hold on that perspective. Now, looking at Indonesia, 275 million people live in Indonesia, and they are going to be struggling a little bit to get access to some internet services, unless I guess using VPNs now, because Indonesia has banned access to Steam, which is going to impact gamers, games from Epic, PayPal, and Yahoo are in there, amongst others. They failed to comply with new restrictive content moderation laws that have been put into place in Indonesia. That's pretty heavy-handed, isn't it, Bill?
Oh, for sure. I mean, what's going on is it's not just Indonesia. There's been this trend towards siloing sections of the internet for some time now. So, the Russian internet experience is quite different from the Chinese experience, from the Western experience, and now, of course, from Indonesia, which is another large nation which has the ability to do this. And that's something which, is very much a thing of our times, is that we're moving into quite separate and, to a degree, disconnected internets. I mean, the global giants that we talk about all the time, they don't really feature much in China, and they don't feature that much in Russia either. So, and yet Russia and China both have their own homegrown giants as well. So we're seeing that silo effect taking place. And as you mentioned, there's obviously some sort of geopolitical stuff going on there too. But it's interesting that Indonesia has done this now. I mean, I'm kind of at a loss to know what their motivation is for doing it at the moment. But it's certainly going to help them grow their own market. And in a way, it's a form of protectionism to do this as well. It's to, it would encourage homegrown service providers and so on to operate out of Indonesia.
Yeah, and it doesn't look as though it's likely to remain, permanent in all cases, or maybe not in any cases. And I saw that that PayPal had been, granted access to continue operating for another 5 days, as of maybe 48 hours ago. So. It's going to be an interesting one to watch, but we are getting this new flavor of the internet, which is a lot more fragmented and becomes sort of somewhat unique based on where you are in the world. And there's probably some good things about that for countries to control their own destiny, but I imagine a lot of that isn't very good overall. Few other things that we. Oh, where you go, Bill?
I was just going to mention that there's a similar thing going on, of course, in Europe with all their data protection acts and so on, where Europeans are starting to have a different experience of these things to Americans, for example.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's and looks, some of what's coming out of Europe, I think, has, there's some really good upsides to that. So, let's see how it plays out. But I hope it doesn't go, quite down the track of what we've seen in China. A couple of other things wanted to touch on. We don't have too much time left, but looking at Samsung, they are adding a repair mode to their smartphones. It's at least in the Korean market, which I find like a really smart move, and it's basically effectively to hide your data on your phone if it has to go in for repair. And look, I mean, just just seems to make sense, doesn't it? Why don't all phones have this? If you need to send a phone in for repair, and an ability to flip it into that mode, obviously depends what it is, whether you've actually got any control of it at all. And there are other cases where sometimes your phone just needs a complete wipe. But I think from a privacy perspective, this sounds like it should be the new normal.
Well, well, let me tell you, there's a dark side to this. You're quite right. There's a light side to it, and you just mentioned that. There's a dark side to it as well, and that is most people that get hit for having things like child pornography and so on their phones, it happens when their phones or their computers go in for repair, and that's the dark side of it. Is that you will be able to hide that kind of, or people will assume that they can hide that kind of material as well. So it's good. It's a good thing, and privacy is a good thing in absolute terms. But as a world, we've managed to do a lot to reduce the incidence of child pornography and other really bad things, because that comes out when people get their stuff repaired. So it's good, but it's not 100% good. Yeah.
Yep. No, it's a fair point. Fair point, Bill. And this is that balancing act that we have on these things, and around encryption, is getting that stuff right. But in general, this seems like a pretty good
Yeah.
case. And yeah, I'm not sure if, I mean, sure, these things can be stumbled across in those sort of scenarios, but it's probably not part of any sort of policing plan for finding such content to block this type of functionality. So I imagine we will probably see it go more broadly. So yeah, my thought on this is overall pretty positive from
Yeah, I agree,
from
actually.
Samsung. But maybe it raises that question where I think it's been on the Apple side around AI, that maybe is able to look for the most extreme stuff as it hits a device, and potentially report that back in some way. But you've got to have some pretty impressive technology to get that right without false positives and so on. And we probably haven't quite reached that point in technology history yet. Would be my take, Bill.
No, absolutely, and it would
Um,
be life-destroying false positives for some people as well.
Potentially. Now, smartphone sales are down. Talking about sales, you shared a figure with me before the show: 8.7% year on year for the most recent quarter. And whilst that started with supply chain issues, now there is actually a big demand drop. Although that's largely coming out of Europe, right? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, demand's plummeted particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, and that's because everyone's not buying stuff. They're not spending money because of the war in Ukraine, of course. People are just becoming very cautious about spending. But worldwide, people are starting to hang on to their phones for longer again, because everywhere in the world, but is seeing a cost of living increase, and that flashy, lovely new phone with the 56 megapixel camera or whatever can wait 6 months while you're putting food on the table or paying your tuition fees or whatever. So there's the economy is starting to hurt the market really strongly. But one of the other things is that there was a huge dip when the world first went into lockdown a couple of years ago in smartphone sales. But before we got to that point, they were already had leveled off and were starting to slowly decline anyway. They went through a huge dip when COVID first came in. Then they bounced back as people started going out again. And so, in a sense, we're down. When we say they're 8.7% down, we're 8.7% down year on year on a year where there was an upswing because there was pent up demand. So what we're probably seeing now is what the real state of the market is, what the real demand level is when we smooth out the numbers, and the days of smartphone growth are behind us. I mean, the penetration of smartphones is so high that there's precious few new customers out there to have. It's become a replacement market.
Yeah, one thing I found fascinating about these numbers, which have been shared by IDC, is that actually Samsung and Apple are doing okay.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
up slightly for Apple, 5.6 for percent for Samsung, but it is the Chinese brands, Xiaomi, Vivo, and Oppo, who've fallen back the most, and that probably speaks somewhat to the place in the market where Samsung and Apple sit, and the reality that those that can afford an Apple in a lot of cases can probably still support afford an
yeah.
Apple device. I guess Samsung are a bit more spread out from lower end to higher end products. So yeah, quite fascinating. I don't really know what else to say about that. I think there's from a consumerism aspect where we maybe don't need to be changing our phones as often as some of us might do, and we're also seeing devices supported for longer with security updates and operating system updates, which helps with the longevity of phones as well. So there's probably some positives in there for lots of the general population, but maybe not so much if you're working inside those firms or you've
Yeah,
invested
I
in them.
mean, the other thing, Paul, is that there hasn't really been any dramatic innovation in phones for some time. I mean, the last big thing that happened was the foldable phones, which are still a freakishly small market. I mean, they're only a few percent of the market at best. And other than that, we've run out. I mean, there's nowhere for them. They're just plastic or metal and glass slabs. They're fast enough. They do all the apps that you could possibly want. The cameras they continue to improve the cameras, but they were brilliant 5 years ago, and um, quite frankly, I don't use any of the extra features on the camera that have happened in the last 5 years, and most people probably don't. So we're running up against the limits of where that can go until there's a complete rethink of smartphones. And I thought that folding would be that rethink, but it's just a bit too expensive and it's just not quite there yet. So a breakthrough in foldable phones could change this, but otherwise we need the model needs to change.
Yeah, look, I think we've just got to a point of maturity, and things will be somewhat different going forward. You've raised good points there. Certainly, looking back a decade ago, we were seeing, there was just constant
Yeah,
evolution and much bigger improvements. But now those things have been largely ticked off. It is more of an incremental thing today. So
yeah.
there we go. Well, there's probably a few more things I would have liked to delved into, but I think we're out of time, Bill. So it's been great to catch up, great to chat through what's going on in the big wide world of technology. If folks do want to sign up for your newsletter or keep up to date with what you're publishing, just a reminder of your website URL.
BillBennett.co.nz with two N's and two T's.
Excellent. Thank
That's
you,
it.
Bill. And also thank you to our show partners, Cyclone, Aruba, Gorilla Technology, HP, Spark, Vodafone, and 2 Degrees for their support. And for those that are maybe have been watching the live stream, you can, of course, find us through your favorite podcast app, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or any of the varying other players like Pocket Casts, which is my favorite. So yeah, have a look there. And of course, if you're listening to our audio and you'd like to catch us live, then make sure you're following and looped in to our social channels, and we're across LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube there as well. So thanks everyone. Have a great week. We'll look forward to chatting again next week. All right, see ya.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.